Okay, welcome everybody to this new Facebook Live. My name is Fabio Buitrago. I'm the course director with ROATAN Dive Academy. I am also an ecologist. And today we have a very special program because we're going to be talking about the fish identification course, but not only about the course. We're going to have Robert Hurd, a professional photographer from Subway Water Sports. He's going to be talking also about his experience in photographing the fish and the behavior of the fish that he has observed while diving here in ROATAN. So we're going to talk during this Facebook Live about the fish identification course. Remember, these Facebook live sessions that we are running are being done to use the time efficiently, as we have some travel restrictions, so you can update your knowledge, you can refresh the knowledge of the courses you have already done, or maybe you would like to take one of these courses when you come down to ROATAN when the restrictions are lifted. So we're going to get started with this course. Remember, this is a live transmission, so if you have any questions, please send us your questions through the live feed so we can answer any of the questions you may have during this transmission. Okay, so we're going to get started, and I would like to start with talking about what is a fish, right? So for the fish identification specialist, you need to be aware of what's a fish, right? And we have spoken in previous lives in the underwater naturalist course. We also talked about on the coral conservation Facebook Live how to classify different organisms. So in this case, we're talking about animals, right? In this case, is fish, which is an animal, a vertebrated animal that swims in the water and breathes using gills. That's a pair of characteristics that these animals have. And just going back to those groups of animals that we have already described on the previous lives when we were talking about the underwater naturalists. Remember, we have the Cnidarians phylum, which is all the corals and jellyfish. We also have the Porifera, which is all the sponges. We have the annelids, which are the worms, the ringed worms. Then we have the mollusks, which include the octopus, all the gasteropods, bivalves. We have echinoderms, which include sea stars and sea urchins, and then we have arthropods, which includes crabs, lobsters, shrimps, and then we have the chordates. Within the chordates, we have different species, we have different groups of species, right? One of these groups is the fish, which is the group that we're going to be talking during this presentation. Usually, you can find information on how to classify the fish, and we have three big groups in which we can classify, we can divide the fish around the world. The first one is going to be the fish that do not have any jaws, so they are jawless fish, right? This group is called the agnata group, right? Agnata means in Latin no jaws, so jawless. Then we have the chondrichthyes, and the chondrichthyes are basically sharks and rays, which are the cartilaginous fish. And then we have a third group, which is the bony fish. This is called the osteichthyes fish, right? Which are most of the fish that we know as fish, right? The common image that we have as fish. Then each of these groups can be also classified in many species, many orders and families. And you can see here in this graphic the number of orders that we have for each of these three big groups of fish. Right, so for the chondrichthyes, for the sharks and rays, we have 14 orders with 50 families and more than 950 species. For the agnata, for the jawless fish, we have 2 orders and 43 families with more than 120 species. And for the bony fish, we have 47 orders with 448 families and more than 33,600 species of fish. So that is a lot of fish. And this is basically why within the fish identification course, we learn how to classify the fish using not the taxonomic and scientific method, because it's too many species of fish to be able to identify one particular species. So what we use is criteria that allows us to group fish, right? So for grouping the fish, we're going to use shape, color, position of the fins, shape or form of the mouth, right? The way they behave in some cases is also a characteristic or a criteria that we use for grouping the fish. So for getting into this explanation on how to classify the fish or how to group the fish, I would like to invite to this Facebook Live Robert Herb. He's a professional photographer, as I was saying before, working here with Subway Water Sports, and he has lots of knowledge and experience on identifying and classifying and recognizing the fish that we have here in ROATAN. So welcome, Bob, to this Facebook Live.
Thank you, Fabio. I really appreciate the invite, and I'm very excited about being here today.
Okay, so now that we have Bob on board, let's go back to the grouping characteristics that we have for the fish, right? So here on the left, you can see the different groups of species, of group of fish that we can divide the fish up, right? So we have the thin-bodied fish, we have the silvery colors, we have the sloping heads, we have oval shapes, we have big bodies and fat lips, we have beak like parrots, we have big eyes and red colors, small long bodies, we have flat shapes and camouflage, we have irregular or weird shapes, and we have also elongated bodies and sharks and rays, which is going to be the last of the groups that we can group the fish in, right? As you can see on the screen, we have an image of the index of this book from Mickey Charteris. I think he's watching us, right? So
yes, yes.
Thank you, Mickey, for this precious jewel of the fish of the Caribbean. And as Rob you were saying that they call it like...
Yeah, this is what we refer to as the ROATAN Bible. If you see it out here in our waters, basically Mickey has captured it and has it as part of the book. Mickey has spent many years putting together this book. It's wonderful because it doesn't just give the information about the species or the fish itself. He gives a lot of background information about its feeding habits, where it can be found, its sizes, just a wealth of information.
Okay, so that said, what I want to say about this book is you can see on the index that Mickey is using, and most of the groups that he has on the index relate to one of those categories that we have on the left, which is basically the way in which we learn to classify or divide the fish to be able to identify the different species. So you, as a fish ID specialist taking this course, will be able to identify the fish, grouping them into any of these categories that we have here. So in the following slide, we're going to be giving you examples of different fish for each of these 12 categories, and we're going to be talking with Bob about what happens with those fish here in Roatan, where he has seen the fish, and actually all the photos that you're going to see during these Facebook Lives are photos taken by Robert, by Bob, as we know him, right? So thank you, Bob, for all the precious, the beautiful photos that we have here on the Facebook Live. So let's get started with the first fish that we have here. This is the group of the thin bodies, right? And we have an angelfish as one of the emblematic fish of this group, right? You can see for all of the species, you would see the scientific name on the corner. What can we say about the angelfish? They have been reported down to 100 meters in depth on the Caribbean. This species in particular is known as the French angelfish, and they distribute from Florida on the north down to Brazil on the south. They basically feed on sponges, and they can also feed on tunicates and some algae that grows on the reef. What have you seen, Bob, here on Roatan with these species?
Especially the angelfish. We normally see them if a turtle is feeding on a sponge. You will see angelfish sitting right there with the turtle, collecting the scraps as the turtle peels off that hard layer on the outside of the larger sponges. The angelfish are just in there grabbing the pieces that fall off. And with that, you can get very close to these angelfish while they're feeding like that. But it's quite hilarious to watch these angelfish. And sometimes you think the turtle's just going to bite into the angelfish. They get so close to where the turtle is feeding. So it's quite hilarious to watch, but we see a lot of angelfish there.
Yeah, one important thing or curious thing about the angelfish as well is that they form pairs for life. And you will always see the male and the female swimming together and feeding together. And they are always around the same area where they have the nest in the case they are reproducing, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so let's move into the second category, and now we have the silvery colors, right? And what we have here is a beautiful photo of a barracuda that Bob took. Where was that, Bob?
This here, I believe, is over at, this would have been at Sponges, a dive site called Sponges. But basically, you see these on most every dive. Barracuda are always off in the distance. Sometimes if you have ledges or crevices, canyons, you'll see them sitting in those canyons, and they're just ambush predators, like Fabio said. And basically, sometimes they'll get quite close to the divers, but we've never had one strike or come after any of us. But they look ferocious. That set of teeth on the front is enough to scare you away.
For sure. One important thing to say about the barracudas is that there is not only one species. Actually, the barracudas are 28 species around the world, and they are different species in the Pacific Ocean, in the Indian Ocean, and in the Atlantic Ocean, and obviously on the Caribbean. And they can get to grow very big. What would be the largest size that you have seen here in Roatan?
I've seen some that approach 3 feet in length, 3 to 3.5 feet. And they are loners when they're that size, of course. But they can be very, very impressive looking, especially when they get to that large size.
Yeah. So this is what we call the silvery group, right? All the fish that have silvery colors, and it's a way of just grouping fish that have these characteristics in common, right? They have a silvery color like the barracudas. Then we go to sloping heads. Within the sloping heads, within this group, you can find either the grunts and the snappers, right? They belong to this group that have the head. You can see on the photo, this is a Cubetto Snapper, and you can see that the head goes sloping down, right? And they do not have the thick, fat leaves that the groupers have, which is a different group that you're going to see farther on. So in this case, this is a Cubetto Snapper. You can see the scientific name right there. These species of snapper have been reported down to 50 meters, right? That's 165 feet. So very deep. And they are distributed in the entire Atlantic Ocean, from Nova Scotia on the north to Brazil on the south, and they feed on anything that moves in front of them. Basically, they hunt by ambush, right? They just wait within the darks of caves and crevices and just wait for a fish to pass by, and then they swim very fast and grab it with the teeth they have in front.
Yeah, and those teeth are very impressive. They normally have 2 canine teeth, as you can kind of make out in the picture there, that are very dominant on the jaw. But one of the other interesting things about snappers in general is a lot of time for us here on ROATAN, snappers will come right up to a diver. They'll come straight at you and stop about 2 or 3 feet in front of you, and they'll make a U-turn and they'll head off into some direction. And what we have observed is that a lot of times they know where there's a lionfish, and they have associated divers as killing lionfish. They won't kill them on their own, but they try and get the divers to come over to a lionfish, and they'll show you where it is, and basically in hopes that you will feed them some of the lionfish.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, we've seen it almost at quite a few different dive sites now, where the snappers are basically trying to get the divers to follow them to a location where there will be a lionfish hidden.
Great, great. Nice information. I didn't know about that. Remember, guys, this is a Facebook live transmission, so if you have any questions or any comments or anything that we're talking, you can just send us your questions by the Facebook feed, the live feed, and Peter Kokish, that is helping here with the writing, is going to take notes on all the questions, and we can try to answer any questions that you may have. So those are the fish that we can group within the group of the sloping heads. Then we have oval shapes. Within the oval shapes, we have a great variety of fish. We can include the damselfish, we can include the disc fish, we can include obviously the hamlets as the one we have here on the photo. Actually, this is a very uncommon species, and I can assume it was very difficult to take a photo because this is a very shy fish. And as a shy fish and not very common, there is not that much information on the fish. So basically, we do not know what's the diet of this fish. We do not know how the fish reproduce, but we do know that they are endemic to the Caribbean. They only exist within the Caribbean Sea. So any information that you can gather, that you can collect as you're observing these fish when you take this course, is going to help us understand how this fish behaves. And obviously that can contribute to taking the appropriate conservation measures. Bob, have you seen different species, or how often do you see these
Well,
species?
it's kind of interesting because according to a lot of the divers that come down here on a yearly basis to visit with us, they all make the same comment that it's rare to see them in a lot of places, but here they see them on a regular basis. For some reason here in Roatan, we seem to have a lot more of these indigo hamlets than in other parts of the Caribbean that a lot of these divers visit on a regular basis. What I have observed myself is from time to time, of course, I'll see them eating algae off of sponges or off of coral heads, but they are very, very shy. Like Fabio said, they tend to just take off at the first instance of a diver coming anywhere close to them. So very hard to get a good shot of them, but apparently, according to other divers anyway, they're a lot more prevalent here in Roatan than they've seen in other parts of the Caribbean.
Okay, great. So again, this is a group in which we can include different species, and you can see how taking the course, taking the fish identification course, can contribute to learning about different behaviors or characteristics that we do not know about many fish. And there is lots of species that do not have enough information on the background. And that's because they are very uncommon, or it's very difficult to study them, or they are active at a time in which we are not diving, and so on. So any information that we can collect from these species is going to be useful for science and for conservation purposes as well. So let's keep on going with another group, and this is the group of the big bodies and fat lips, right? In this case, we include in this group all the groupers. And it is important to mention that groupers is not only one species. Actually, here on the photo, these 4 photos from Bob, you can see 3 different species. The 2 on top are black groupers. Then the one on the lower left is a tiger grouper, and then the one on the lower right is an Nassau grouper, right? But it is important to mention that this group has 32 genus of groupers, and there is 234 species of groupers around the world. So when we talk about groupers, we're talking about obviously the groupers that grow larger, because those are the ones that call our attention, but there's groupers that do not grow that large. There is so many species that stay small as to maybe be confused with a snapper, right? So they are carnivorous, and they also hunt as by ambush, right? They just wait for the fish to pass by, and they have an incredible suction power. So they can suck in a fish within a distance, and they can also suck in sand to get to those little tiny shrimps or crabs that are buried on the sand. What's your experience here, Bob, with the groupers in Roatan?
Well, we see quite a few of the larger groupers, usually around the wreck sites, especially the El Aguila here on the north side of the island, down towards the west end. Some of them get very large. There's a group of them that we've seen that are probably, a good close to 3 foot in size, and you know, some good weight to them. Again, they have no fear of divers. In fact, they've associated divers to feeding them, unfortunately, which is not a practice that we encourage at all. But a lot of times they'll come right up to divers and dive masters looking for handouts. The thing that we have to caution everybody is, please, you know, don't touch them, don't handle the fish. You know, you can do more harm than good for them. So, but they do get right up next to you. They are great for photography because they'll even sit there and open their mouths way up and let you just take a shot right down through their stomach. You know, so quite interesting, very good photography subjects for us.
Okay, great. So that was a group of the fat lips. Then we move on and we get to a group which is very easy to distinguish because of the mouth, right? They have a beak. Instead of having teeth as the fish that we have seen before, they have a solid and very sharp beak as a parrot, right? That's why they are called parrotfish. And in this case, we see one, they call it blue moon, right?
Yeah, this is a midnight blue parrotfish. They're kind of rare to see, but they get very large. And most of the time, they do not stick around when they know a diver's in the water. They're hard to get a good picture of, but they're very colorful. I mean, you can't miss them. It's almost like a fluorescent blue in the water. So
Yeah.
very interesting.
And very important to mention as well that these are very important fish for the reef because the shape of their mouth, what they do is they just scrape the algae off the reef. So basically they can eat all the algae that is growing on top of the corals and can eventually kill the corals by overgrowing on top of the coral. So the parrotfish are going to be a very interesting ecological and important ecological species to control the algae that kills the coral, right? And also there is lots of articles that mention that the amount of sand that they produce because of when they scrape the algae from the corals, they are also eating small pieces of the carbonate, of the calcium carbonate that builds the coral, that the coral build underneath, right? So basically all the white sands that we know from the Caribbean are basically excrement of the parrotfish that have been feeding on the coral reef. And as Mickey says and mentions here on the book, one parrotfish can produce tons of white sand every year, just because of the habit they have from scraping of the reef. And another important data that we have to mention is that within the parrotfish, there is 95 different species. So it is not only the blue or the green, the traffic light parrotfish, as they call it, right? There is lots of many more species of parrotfish that are very important to control the algae growth on top of the reef.
I agree. These guys are phenomenal at producing a lot of sand. If you've ever followed one behind, it seems like they never stop producing new sand.
It's like a rain that falls on you.
That's right. That's correct.
Okay, so let's keep on going now with another group, and we get to the group of the big eyes. Usually this group is not only distinguished by the big size of the eyes, but also because of the red colors that they have. So in this photo from Bob, we have a squirrelfish. And squirrelfish are distributed from the Carolinas, North Carolina, down to Brazil on the south, including all the Caribbean. And one important characteristics of these species is that they can make a sound. And basically, there is like a few species of fish that can actually make a sound. And this species makes two different sounds. One is like an alarm. So one fish that sees a predator coming close by makes a sound like an alarm for all the school of the fish to be aware because there is a predator close by. And then they have a second sound, which is the retreat sound. When the predator is attacking or is coming too close, then they just run into the cave or the darks of the rocks. So they make a different sound for that. The squirrelfish, they eat on crustaceans and mollusks, and they are active at night, and that's why they have that big eye, because at night there is less light, so they need to have larger eyes to capture the small amount of light so they can see at night and find the prey that they are going to feed on.
Yeah,
Bob?
the squirrelfish are very common here. Almost under every ledge or in every crevice, you can find at least one squirrelfish. And like Fabio said, apparently they do make quite the sound when you get too close or if you look like a predator or whatever. But very common here, very colorful. They come in lots of different colors of orange and a little bit difference on shape, but it's a easy fish during the day to spot. At night, I'm sure they're out hunting in the reef, but they get scared off with any kind of lights that you might have.
I'm just curious about why, maybe this is a question for Mickey. Why do they call it squirrelfish?
Yeah.
Because you think of a squirrel like jumping and going from one place to another one.
Interesting, yeah.
But
We'll
it might be maybe because of the sound that they make. This is something that would be very interesting to ask one of the scientists behind the books to see why they call it like that. Also within the big eyes, we have the Bigeyefish, right?
That's correct.
This is one of the different species that we have within this group. It is important to mention that big-eye fish, there is 12 different species on the Caribbean. There is also one that is called the glass-eye fish because they have like a white cover on top of the eye that allows them to see better during the night when they are active. And these big-eye species that we have on the screen is a species that feeds on small fish and crustaceans that they can find on the reef. Some important thing that I have to mention, one important thing that I have to mention is the position of the mouth. As you see on some fish, like for example the groupers, you have the mouth more like towards the downside of the head. In this case, you have the mouth opening more towards the upper part of the head, right? So the position of the mouth and the shape of the mouth is going to be very important to allow us to identify the different species. And in some cases, it is even one of the criteria that you need to identify to be able to distinguish one species from another one. So in this case, just notice the position of the mouth, right? And the proportion of the mouth, the shape of the fish, and the size of the eye, which is going to be another criteria used for identification. Bob?
Yeah. This big eye that you see on your screen, basically, I very rarely find these fish out there. I was very surprised and took the picture and had to run back and check with Mickey's book to figure out what kind it was, what the species was as part of the big eye family. But don't see a lot of them out here. And I was very surprised and very thankful to be able to get a good picture of one.
Okay, good. So we move now to the following group, which is going to be the fish that are very small and they have long bodies, which is different from the fish that have big size and have long bodies, like the trumpet fish, for example. So this is a group of fish in which we find small fish that have long, elongated bodies, right? So, for example, the gobies and the blennies fall in within this group, within this category. And what we have here on the screen is one species of a blenny. And it is important to mention that only within this genus of blennies, the Acantha which is one single genus of blennies, there is 21 species of this genus. And there is 90 different species in total of the blennies in different families around the world. So they are very difficult to identify because of the size. Most of these species grow up to 5 centimeters. So we're talking about something this size. And usually they stay in a hole that they make on the rock, and they have the tail within the rock. So what you see out of the rock is only the head that is going to be like 1 or 2 centimeters. So basically we're talking about a fish that usually lives within a rock, and you only see the head, which is very tiny and very difficult to identify. Another important characteristic, and maybe Bob, you can talk more about this, is that they move the eyes independently. So you can see them like moving the eyes in each of the sides to different directions to be able to spot maybe not only food but also potential predators that swim by.
That's correct. Now we have a couple dive sites here close to Subway Water Sports in Turquoise Bay that you can always find a bunch of lemons. This guy was just out on his own, which is very rare. Like Fabio said, they generally, all you see is the head sticking out from a little small hole in the rock. The other thing is, if you notice, it looks like they have feet or legs. They use those front fins to basically move around on the sand. They don't swim in the free column that often. In fact, I've never seen them. They tend to walk more than they do anything else. So kind of an interesting fish. Need to have a macro for these guys in order to do justice. Unfortunately, I don't shoot that much macro. I'm normally with a wide angle lens. So this one was cropped quite a bit, and I was just glad to get one out in the sand where you could kind of see the whole body. So
okay, good. So yeah, very interesting. This group of blennies is very diverse, right? You can find lots of colors, shapes. The color of the eyes, in some cases, is a criteria used for identifying different species of fish. Then we move to another group, which is the flat shape, right? In these, and there is not only, I have to say, not only the flat shape, but also bottom dwellers, right? So you can include within this group the stonefish, for example. There is also the, what was the name of it? Well, the different species of flounders. And this one that we can see here on the screen, it is called the peacock flounder, right?
that is correct.
And the peacock flounder is one of the species that I was talking to Bob before the live. There is one important characteristics on the flounders that you have to pay attention when you see them. There is basically two different families of flounders, right? And the difference between one family and the other one is the way they flip their bodies. When they are born, they are up straight and they have the eyes in each of the sides, right, in both sides. But as they grow up, they flip to one side and the eye that is under goes on top, right? So there's one family that flips to the left and there's one family that flips to the right. If they flip to the left, then the mouth is going to be on the right-hand side. If they flip to the left, then the mouth is going to be, if they flip to the right, the mouth is going to be on the left-hand side. So in this case, you can see the mouth on the left of the fish, meaning that the eye that you can see on the right-hand side was the eye that was under and came on top, right? So the eye migrates on the body to be on top of the fish. And that allows the fish, instead of swimming vertical, to swim horizontally like that. And obviously the color allows them to camouflage on the sand. So they hunt by ambushing the fish that swim by. Right, so this is the family Botidae as we know it in Latin, and that's why the genus is Botus, because it belongs to the Botidae family. As I said, this is one of the species that flips to the right. So Bob, where do you take this photo and how often do you see these flounders here in Roatan?
Yeah, we see flounder quite a bit, almost every sandy area. If you pay real good close attention, you'll find small ones to larger size. They're quite common in Roatan here. The peacock is probably the most prevalent that we see. The color range is unbelievable on these guys. I've seen them everything from almost a bright pink to a deep orange to this gray with blue to green, almost a solid green. So they adapt, like Fabio said, to their environment, and they'll change color on a regular basis. So it's hard to find them, but they're there, and the easiest place to look is in any of our sandy areas here.
Okay, so let's move on to the following group. Oh, this is still within the same group. As I said, it's not only the flat shape, but also the bottom dwellers, and in this case, we have a toadfish. Toadfish are very unique. They can go as deep as 20 meters. They have been reported down to 20 meters. And this species that we have on the screen with this beautiful photo from Bob is actually a species that is endemic to Central America. The distribution range is from Belize to Panama. They do not go farther to the south, and they do not go farther to the north. So you can only find them here in Central America. They feed on fish, and obviously they are hunters as well. They hunt the fish by ambush as well. They just hide, trusting their camouflage, and when the fish pass by, they just go ahead and grab it. So, Bob, where do you take these photos, and how often do you see this fish here in ROATAN?
We see these at almost all of our dive sites. They're quite common, and the way that you can tell if there's toadfish in the area is they make a very large croaking sound. When you enter the water, you'll hear them croaking, and you know there's a toadfish in the area. Basically, they're night hunters, so during the day they're sitting in holes. They're holes that they hold up in, and they become ambush predators during the day. But at night they're active. They do go out, do come out of their holes, and basically they're almost a snake-like body. If you see them, the head is much bigger than the rest of their body. It tapers off quite a bit as it goes towards the tail. So a lot of our divers are very surprised when they see one of these guys outside of its hole, because it almost looks like a snake. It's very unique shape.
These guys, correct me if I'm wrong, they also have a very strong suction power, right?
That's
they
correct.
Can suck in the fish.
Yeah, in fact, some of the toadfish here, some of the dive masters have taken chunks of lionfish and used that to entice them to come out of the hole to show divers what they look like. It's not a good practice, but when it does happen, I am very surprised because the suction power of these guys is phenomenal. The piece of fish can be 1.5 feet away, and they'll just inhale and pull that right in just faster than your eye can even see it. So very unique and very large snake-like bodies. So kind of an interesting fish to see.
Okay, great. So let's move on now to the following group. And this is a group that has all the weirdos, right? So all the weird shapes, right? So uncommon shapes. And within this group, we can find like the boxfish, we can find the pufferfish, we could find the file and the triggerfish, we could also find the seahorses. So in the photo, what we have is filefish, and there is lots of things that are very interesting on these fish. One is that they are omnivorous; they eat a variety of things, but more commonly you can see them feeding on algae, sponges. And they can also eat tunicates and gorgonians. Gorgonians are soft coral, so basically they eat the animals from the sea fans. They also form pairs for life. So what you see here in the photo, and correct me, Bob, if I'm wrong, this is a male and a female.
That's correct.
And they make a pair for life. So they stick around and they live in the same area. They hunt they feed in the same area, and they reproduce obviously in the area where they live, right? And they can also change color when you approach, and they feel scared. They can go darker, so they get like more contrasted colors.
Yes.
And they can get into crevices to hide when divers or predators are getting too close.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, as divers, we see these quite regularly. They're at most of our dive sites. You'll find pairs of these things, and again, just like the snappers. If there's a turtle feeding on a sponge, these are very optimistic feeders. They'll come right in there with the turtle and just grab pieces of the sponge as the turtle's ripping off the large chunks. And like Fabio said, you normally see them paired up like this, where one has the spots on it and the other is more of a straight color. But they can change their color while you're watching them. It's a very fast color change.
And most of the people, Bob, maybe you can help us clarify. Most of the people do not know what's the difference between the filefish and the triggerfish, and they tend to confuse them.
That's correct.
Right? And the main difference would be the spine that they have on the back, right? The
That's correct. Yeah, the triggerfish has a very unique, very large pointed spine. It flips up from time to time, and that's what distinguishes it different from the filefish or from the spotted filefish. Yep.
Okay, so within this group also, as we were saying, we have also the seahorses. And they have different, there's like more than 200 species around the world. And even the same species can have different colors. So for example, we have here the same species with two different coloration types. There's many facts that are very interesting about the seahorses. Most of you maybe have heard that the males are the ones that get pregnant and the males are the ones that give birth, right? They feed on small zooplankton, right? So they just wait for the little tiny microscopic animals that we cannot see, but they can see, and they just suck them in with the elongated beak that they have. These are fish, and most people also think that these are not fish, but they are invertebrates, or maybe they are more like echinoderms. At some point, I think they were within the echinoderms group, but now they are considered fish because they have gills, because they also have a swim bladder and they can regulate the buoyancy the same as fish. And they have fins as well. They have a dorsal fin, they have a pectoral fin, and they have a caudal fin that they don't use that much because they swim more with the dorsal fin moved like making a movement, right? And they can just propulse their bodies forward. So yeah, tell us about the photos.
Yeah, so basically, as you notice, the one on the left is quite a bit large in the stomach. We believe that one is pregnant. But to watch these things swim, it's like slow motion. You don't hardly see the little fins as they're moving from one location to another. But as soon as they get to the other location, they use their tail to wrap around to anchor themselves. And like Fabio says, they'll sit in an area, and from time to time you can see them just make a dart with their mouths towards something. You won't really see what it is, but apparently it's some plankton that they're after. We have quite a few different dive sites here where we regularly see seahorses, and they do come in all colors, blacks, whites, browns, reds, oranges, yellows, so quite common. Just ask your dive master when you come down here, you want to see a seahorse, and I'm sure he'll accommodate you.
And also don't forget to ask them what signs they use for signaling a seahorse, and you will find the same variety as colors that you can find on the seahorse on signs that you can use for pointing out a seahorse on the ocean.
Exactly.
Also within the weird shapes, we have the porcupine fish. We said also the pufferfish. And this is one of Peter's favorite because they eat sea urchins, right? And they can grow very big. The porcupine fish can be as 91 centimeters in length. Maybe that's 1 meter, should be like 3 feet in length, right? Yeah. They can inflate their bodies as a defense mechanism, but it is not a good habit for those of you that have seen it. It's not a good habit to just poke the animal to inflate the stomach. Basically what the animal is doing is filling the stomach with water, so they remain inflated for a long period of time in which they cannot eat, they cannot feed themselves. So basically you're making more damage, you're harming the animals by inflating the pufferfish or the porcupine fish. So these animals, as we were saying, they eat basically sea urchins. They can also eat mollusks and some crustaceans. And another important characteristics of these fish is that they have a toxin that is called tetradotoxin, that they have on the liver, they have on the skin, and they have also on the guts. Yeah. And in some places, in Japan, for example, there are some species that they feed on. They have to know how to cut those areas that have the venoms, the toxins, so they can feed on the meat. Here, for good reasons, I mean, for the fish as well, we do not, in America, we do not eat this fish, and we do not encourage not even to touch the fish and bother the fish, because they are part of the ecosystem, and as good divers, we need to respect all the living forms that we find on the reef.
That's correct, and basically these, we refer to them as big puppy dogs, with the big eyes the way they are. You see them quite common out here, and basically just cruising around from one location to another. It's kind of a fun fish to get pictures of because they do get quite large. They generally, if they find a crevice or something, they'll go in it and just sit there and just have their head looking out. And all you'll see are the big eyes and the white mouth, the big telltales for when there's a porcupine fish inside of a ledge or under a ledge.
Okay, so these animals are nocturnal as well. They are more active at night.
That's correct.
Now we go to the lone bodies, and there is different species that we can put into this group. So the animal that we can see here on the screen is a moray eel, a green moray eel, right? This is a carnivorous species that can go very deep on the ocean. Actually, it has been found in 40 meters in depth. That's 145 feet. They are distributed from New Jersey to Brazil, so they have a very large distribution range. And they can get to measure 2.5 meters. That would be like 8 feet in length, yeah. Right? Although the mean length would be like 1.8, so basically like 5 feet. They are more active at night, and they feed on fish, octopus, and small crustaceans that they can grab and crunch with their very strong jaws. Bob?
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed is most of the divers that come down here, again, one of the unique features of ROATAN is that we see a lot of free swimming green eels during the day. You see them cruising along the wall, or ducking in and out, of holes and crevices. They're very common to see out during the day hunting. Where in most of the Caribbean, according to other divers and my own experience in traveling throughout the Caribbean, you usually only see them at night. So this is a good opportunity to come see them and get real close to these guys during the daylight time.
Okay, so now we have gotten to the last group, which is very easy to classify as a group, right? We have sharks and rays. And what we have on the left is a reef shark, and on the right we have an eagle ray. The reef shark, they get to grow to as long as 3 meters. That would be like 9 feet. They feed basically on fish. They can also eat squids around the reef, right? And one important characteristic or unique characteristic of these species of shark is that they are viviparous, meaning that they give birth to living sharks, not as other species that lay eggs or carry the eggs within the female body. In this case, one female can give birth to 4 to 6 little sharks every year, right? So that's something unique of this species that you do not find in any other species of shark that we can find around this area. And then on the right, we have the eagle ray, which is also different from the rest of the rays because they have the head separated from the body. And also they have kind of a shovel in front of their head, which they use for shoveling on the sand because they feed basically on mollusks and crustaceans that they can find buried on the sand. So they just shovel the sand and they soak in the little prey that they feed on. Bob?
Yeah, the sharks, of course, there is a shark dive here on ROATAN that basically we ourselves, Subway, don't offer it, but we allow our guests to go and do a shark dive here on the island. It's held by one organization. So it's quite exciting, quite a lot of fun to do, and something you might want to do on your own while you're down here with us. The eagle rays, we have 1 or 2 dive sites that we almost can guarantee that you'll always see eagle rays. They're very common. I've seen personally myself up to 24 in one flight of eagle rays going up one of the channels here. They are just spectacular. Their tails can be, at least 4 to 5 times in length of their bodies. So you see the body, the triangle body, and then this long, long tail that sticks out way behind the eagle ray.
And it is true also that the spots that they have on the back is like a fingerprint, right?
That's
They have
correct.
a unique arrangement of white spots on the back, so you can identify individuals by the colors that they have on the back, right?
That is correct. In fact, that I've been told is how they try and identify to figure out what the habits of certain eagle rays are. They'll take pictures, and then back in the lab, they have some AI to try and match it up with previous pictures to determine where it was last spotted or what its range of travel is.
Okay, so with this, we have gotten to the last of the groups in which we can organize and divide the fish. But the course is not only about classifying the fish. There is also some information that you need to be able to gather, right? So in this case, as a fish identification specialist, you also need to understand how to conduct surveys. And there is different types of surveys, active and passive. We use passive survey methods as using a transect, a line transect, or using an area to survey the fish. And basically what we do is we count the different species and count the different numbers of individuals within the species that we are watching at each site for a given length or for a given area. So we can have an idea of how abundant the fish are, how common the fish are, what are the more common fish, what are the more uncommon fish, and then we can play with that ecologically, saying which fish belong to what step of the trophic chain, of the food chain, so we know how the ecosystem is built. So this is something also that you learn on the course. And for the basic course, we have two dives, right? The first dive, in the first dive, you will classify or group the fish according to the categories that we have discussed. And you're going to draw the characteristics of the fish that you do not know. Obviously, this live is covering just a very fast brief on what we talk about the different groups of fish, right? When we get into detail, you're going to get more information on the shape of the mouth, the fins, the length, the proportions, the colors, the types of scales that you can find on the fish, the position of the eyes, and so on, to allow you identify the different species of fish that you are going to find. You record them, and then we come back and use the books to try and identify the scientific name of each of the species. So in the following dive, we already know the species that we found in the previous site. So for the second dive, what we do is practice surveying fish, right? Applying one of these methods, doing a transect or covering an area to measure the abundance of fish in a given spot. So with that said, I want to thank Bob for being here in this Facebook Live and sharing all the knowledge, all the information that he knows, and obviously for all the beautiful photos that he has allowed us to use during this Facebook Live. Thank you, Bob, so much for being here.
Thank you.
And I think you're promoting a photo contest, right? So if you want to talk about that, please.
I appreciate again the invite and the opportunity to come down here and be part of this. It's such an important part of Subway and Turquoise Bay. You know, I'm just pleased that I could put a little bit of a contribution to this. We do have something called, it's an annual event, the ROATAN Underwater Photo Festival. Basically, it's held once a year. This year it's held, well, we're hoping it's held November 14th through the 21st. And basically, Andrew Rake is one of the hosts. I'm the other host for this. We have some guest speakers such as Mickey, the gentleman that wrote the Caribbean Reef Life book, will be here. So we spend that whole week diving some of the best sites here on Roatan and basically assisting photographers in just becoming that much better. And it can be any level of photographer, everybody from just starting out to professional photographers. We have a lot of fun every night. We have classes and we review photos that were taken during the day, and those that want assistance with either processing or tips on how to use the camera, we're there to help out. So please, if you get the chance, please go to Turquoise Bay and sign up for it, or to the Roatan Underwater Photo Fest. page, and you can sign up right on there also. You can go to my sites also, and I have direct links to them. My site is just robertherb.com, and you'll find just thousands of photos, just like what you've been seeing here tonight, and basically links to things like the ROATAN Underwater Photo Fest. Again, Fabio, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this.
No, thank you. Thank you, Bob, for all the photos, and hopefully we can do more of these Facebook Lives in the upcoming future. Okay, so for those of you that are interested on the courses, you can visit us on the Facebook page. You can visit us on the web page that you can see on the screen. You can send us an email on the email that you can see right there on the screen, and I will try to answer any questions that you may have, or send you the links to the pages that Bob was mentioning before in the case you need assistance. Remember, these Facebook Lives are going to live in our YouTube channel as well, so you can revisit the videos, you can download them, you can share them with your friends if you want, and that we are running these series of Facebook Lives just to use the time in which we have travel restrictions more efficiently and try to refresh the knowledge, or give you some information on the future courses that you may want to take when you come down here in ROATAN with Subway Water Sports and ROATAN Dive Academy. So thank you so much for getting to the end of the seminar, and see you next time.